The gunshot tore through the midnight air, silencing the rowdy saloon crowd as Clara O'Sullivan pressed herself against the rough-hewn wall of the alley, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild mustang. Elko, Nevada, 1876, a town where gossip traveled faster than the Union Pacific and judgment fell harder than the desert rain. She hadn't meant to fall for him, the mysterious stranger who'd ridden in from nowhere with storm-gray eyes and secrets tucked beneath his dusty hat. But fall she had, and now all of Elko seemed determined to make her pay for it. Clara caught her breath, listening as the drunken shouts of her pursuers faded into the distance. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her simple calico dress, now torn at the hem from her desperate flight. At 22, she'd never imagined becoming the town pariah, but loving Weston Hayes had changed everything. "Miss O'Sullivan." His voice came low and steady from the shadows, causing her to startle. Weston stepped forward, moonlight catching the silver of his spurs. "They've gone east." "We should head west." "My reputation is in tatters," Clara whispered, fighting back tears. "My own father won't speak to me. The mercantile won't sell to me. All because you showed kindness to a stranger," Weston finished, his voice tight with anger. He reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "This town has made up its mind about me without knowing a damned thing about who I am." The wind whistled between the buildings, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Clara looked up at him, this man she'd known for barely 2 months, yet who had somehow claimed a piece of her heart that she couldn't reclaim if she tried. "They say you're an outlaw," she said softly. "That you rode with the Taylor gang in Texas. That you've killed men." Weston's jaw tightened beneath his neatly trimmed beard. At 30, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who'd seen his share of hardship, but his eyes remained clear and honest. "I've never ridden with any gang," he said, "and I've only ever drawn my gun to protect myself or others." He hesitated. "But I have my reasons for keeping to myself, Clara, reasons that have nothing to do with what they're saying." A door slammed somewhere nearby, making Clara flinch. She'd been the town school teacher until yesterday, when the school board had asked for her resignation. A woman of questionable virtue, they'd said, could not be entrusted with the town's children. "We should move," Weston said, scanning the alleyway. "My horse is at the livery. I can get you somewhere safe." Clara hesitated. Leaving with him now would confirm every vicious rumor, would sever the last tenuous threads connecting her to the life she'd built in Elko. Her father, the town's respected doctor, would disown her completely. "I can't just leave," she whispered. "This is my home." Weston stepped closer, his expression softening in the dim light. "Is it still your home when they treat you like this? When they condemn you for something as simple as sharing coffee with me at the cafe?" It had started so innocently. Weston had arrived in town in early spring, taking odd jobs and keeping to himself. Clara had first spoken to him at the church picnic, where he'd helped her set up tables despite the suspicious glances from the other townsfolk. Their conversations had been proper, their meetings in public places. But in a town like Elko, a single woman showing interest in an unknown man was scandal enough. When they'd been seen walking along the river last Sunday afternoon, the whispers had turned to open hostility. "I don't understand it," Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. "Why do they hate you so? People fear what they don't understand," Weston replied, his voice low. "And a man who doesn't share his business makes folks mighty suspicious in these parts." Another shout echoed from down the street. The search party was doubling back. "I need to get back to my boarding house," Clara said urgently. "Mrs. Whittaker will lock the doors at 10. Weston nodded, though his expression showed concern. "I'll see you there safely." But Clara, he paused, taking her hand again, this won't blow over. Not in a town like this. I know, she replied, feeling the weight of that truth settle on her shoulders. They moved through the shadows of Elko, avoiding the main street with its glowing saloon windows and late-night pedestrians. The town had sprung up around the Central Pacific Railroad, growing from a simple station stop to a bustling community of nearly 1,000 souls. Clara had arrived 4 years earlier, fresh from Teachers College in San Francisco, full of dreams about building a life in this frontier town. Now those dreams felt as substantial as the dust devils that spun across the Nevada desert. "Here we are," Weston whispered as they approached the 2-story boarding house where Clara rented a room. The windows were dark except for the parlor, where Mrs. Whittaker undoubtedly waited, armed with disapproval and her well-worn Bible. "Thank you," Clara said, reluctantly pulling her hand from his. "What will you do now?" Weston's eyes flicked to the street behind them, then back to her face. "I've got business to finish here after that." He shrugged. "There's always another town." The thought of him leaving sent a sharp pain through Clara's chest. "Weston, Miss O'Sullivan." Mrs. Whittaker's shrill voice cut through the night as the front door swung open. "Is that you skulking about at this hour? And with him?" The elderly woman stood framed in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, a lantern held high in one gnarled hand. Her face, normally pinched with perpetual disapproval, now twisted with outright disgust. "Mrs. Whittaker, I don't want to hear it," the woman snapped. "I warned you about associating with this drifter. Now the whole town's talking, and I won't have my establishment tarnished by your foolishness." Weston stepped forward. "Madam, Miss O'Sullivan was accosted by some rowdy men from the saloon. I was merely escorting her home safely." Mrs. Whittaker's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hayes, I don't recall asking for your explanation." She turned her attention back to Clara. "You have until morning to collect your things. I'll not have you under my roof another night." Clara felt as though she'd been struck. "But Mrs. Whittaker, where am I to go?" "It's the middle of the night. Perhaps you should have considered that before throwing your lot in with a man the sheriff himself has questions about," the woman replied coldly. She stepped back inside. "Your key still works tonight. By 9 tomorrow I want you gone." The door closed with a definitive click, leaving Clara and Weston in stunned silence. "She can't do this," Clara whispered, though she knew full well that Mrs. Whittaker could and would. Weston's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Clara. This is my fault." "No," Clara said, suddenly angry. "It's not your fault that this town is filled with narrow-minded, judgmental people who'd rather believe the worst than see the truth." She turned to face him fully. "What is the truth, Weston? Who are you really?" He hesitated, glancing toward the distant mountains that loomed black against the star-filled sky. "I'm not who they think I am, but telling you everything puts you in more danger, not less. I've already lost my position, my reputation, and now my home," Clara pointed out. "What more do I have to lose?" Weston sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "Let's get you inside. It's not safe to talk here." Clara nodded, fishing her key from her reticule with trembling fingers. As they slipped inside the darkened boarding house, she could feel the weight of countless unseen eyes upon them, the judgment of a town that had already made up its mind about both of them. Her small room on the second floor was neat and sparse: a single bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand, a small writing desk, and a trunk containing her modest belongings. Clara lit the lamp, casting the room in a warm, amber glow as Weston stood awkwardly by the door. "I shouldn't be in here," he said quietly. "If someone saw me come up." My reputation is already in ruins, Clara replied with unexpected bitterness. What difference would it make now? She sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. Please, Weston, tell me what's going on. He remained by the door for a long moment before reluctantly moving to the wooden chair by her desk. Sitting down, he placed his hat on his knee, revealing the full worry in his features. I came to Elko tracking someone, he said finally. A man who's done terrible things. I believed he was hiding here, perhaps working at the silver mine or one of the ranches. Clara frowned. You're a bounty hunter. No, Weston shook his head. I'm a Pinkerton agent. The revelation hung in the air between them. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency was well known across the country. Men who worked for Alan Pinkerton often operated in secret, tracking down criminals for the government or wealthy clients. That's why you've been asking questions around town, Clara realized. Why you've been watching the stagecoach arrivals. Weston nodded. The man I'm after is responsible for a bank robbery in Sacramento that left 3 people dead, including a young woman about your age. Her father hired the agency to find the man responsible. Clara absorbed this information, relief washing over her. So you're not an outlaw. A ghost of a smile touched Weston's lips. No, though in my line of work, it sometimes helps if people think I might be. Criminals let their guard down around men they believe to be like them. Why didn't you tell me? Clara asked, hurt coloring her voice. Did you think I would expose your secret? No, Weston said quickly. I trust you, Clara, but in my experience, the fewer people who know the truth, the safer everyone is. This man I'm tracking, he's dangerous. He wouldn't hesitate to hurt anyone who got in his way. Clara stood and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. So once you find him, you'll leave Elko. That was the plan, Weston acknowledged. He paused, then added more softly, until I met you. She turned to look at him, her heart quickening. What are you saying? Weston set his hat aside and stood, crossing the small room to join her by the window. I'm saying that for the first time in years, I've found someone that makes me question whether I want to keep living this life. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray curl from her cheek. You've changed things for me, Clara O'Sullivan. The tenderness in his touch made her breath catch. I've barely known you 2 months. Sometimes 2 months is all it takes to recognize what matters, he replied. His eyes, usually so guarded, now reflected the lamplight with an openness that made Clara's heart ache. The town will never accept us, she whispered. Not now. Then perhaps we find a place that will, Weston suggested, after I finish my job here. A shout from the street below broke the moment. Clara peered out to see a group of men moving toward the boarding house, several carrying lanterns. At their head was Sheriff Dale Morgan, his silver star catching the light. They're coming here, Clara gasped. The sheriff and at least 6 men. Weston moved quickly to the window, his expression hardening as he assessed the situation. Someone must have seen us enter together. They're working themselves up into a frenzy. What do we do? Clara asked, fear making her voice tremble. Weston turned to her, his decision already made. We leave. Now, I have a friend with a ranch about 20 miles north. We can reach it before dawn if we ride hard. But your assignment will have to wait, he finished. Your safety comes first. Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll need a moment to pack. While she hastily gathered her most essential belongings into a small carpet bag, Weston checked the loading of his revolver and peered out the window again. The men were already entering the boarding house, their angry voices carrying up the stairwell. We'll have to go out the back, Weston said. Is there another staircase? Clara nodded. The service stairs lead to the kitchen. We can exit through the back door. They moved quickly and quietly, Clara leading the way down the narrow service stairs as the heavy footsteps and voices of the men echoed from the main staircase. Mrs. Whittaker's shrill protests against the intrusion provided cover for their escape through the kitchen and out into the small garden behind the boarding house. The night air was cool against Clara's flushed skin as they hurried through the darkened backyards of Elko's residential district, keeping to the shadows. Her sensible boots, meant for the schoolhouse rather than flight, pinched with each hurried step, but she bit back any complaint. "The livery is just ahead," Weston whispered, guiding her with a gentle hand at the small of her back. "My horse is there and we can secure one for you." "What if the livery man raises the alarm?" Clara asked, breathless from their pace. "Old Pete won't," Weston assured her. "He's not one for town politics, and I've paid him well for his discretion in the past." True to Weston's word, the elderly livery manager merely raised an eyebrow at their nighttime arrival, but asked no questions as Weston requested his own horse and a steady mare for Clara. "Heading out for a midnight ride, are we?" Pete drawled, his rheumy eyes taking in Clara's disheveled appearance and the small bag clutched in her hands. "Something like that," Weston replied, counting out coins into the man's gnarled palm. "We were never here, Pete." The old man pocketed the money with a nod. "Don't recall seeing nobody tonight. My eyesight ain't what it used to be, especially after dark." Within minutes, they were mounted and heading out the back of the livery, avoiding the main road through town. Clara, who had learned to ride as a child in California, managed to keep pace with Weston as they skirted the edge of town and headed north across the open range. The night was clear, the vast canopy of stars providing enough light to navigate by once their eyes adjusted to the darkness. The gentle rhythm of the horses' hooves against the hard, packed earth became the only sound as Elko fell behind them. Clara's mind raced faster than the horse beneath her. In the space of a few hours, she had lost everything familiar: her position, her home, her standing in the community. She was now riding into the unknown with a man she had strong feelings for but still barely knew, a man who hunted dangerous criminals for a living. "Are you all right?" Weston called softly from beside her, concern evident in his voice. "I don't know," Clara answered honestly. "Everything's happening so fast." Weston nodded in understanding. "We'll rest soon. There's a creek about 5 miles ahead where the horses can drink." They rode in silence for a time, the vast Nevada landscape spreading around them like an ocean of sage and scrub. Clara had always loved the stark beauty of this country, so different from the lush California hills of her childhood. Now she saw it with new eyes as a wilderness that offered both danger and freedom. When they reached the creek, a ribbon of silver cutting through the dark landscape, Weston helped Clara dismount. Her legs trembled from the unaccustomed ride, and she sank gratefully onto a flat rock while Weston tended to the horses. "I should have told you everything from the beginning," he said as he returned to her side, offering a canteen of water. "Maybe things wouldn't have come to this." Clara took a long drink before responding. "Or maybe they would have. Elko has always been suspicious of outsiders. Even after 4 years, I was still that California girl to most of them." She looked up at him. "What happens now, Weston?" He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the night's growing chill. "My friend's ranch is about 15 more miles. Jack McCall is a good man, he won't turn us away. You can rest there while I figure out what to do about my assignment." "And after that?" Clara pressed. Weston was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the starlit horizon. "That depends on what you want, Clara. I won't pretend this life is easy. The work I do takes me from place to place, often in danger." "And yet you suggested we might find a place that would accept us," she reminded him. "I did," he acknowledged, "because meeting you has made me consider things I haven't thought about in years. A home, maybe a different line of work." He turned to face her fully. "I won't make promises I can't keep, but I know that what I feel for you isn't something I'm willing to walk away from without a fight." Clara felt tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming rush of emotions. "I barely know you," she whispered again, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Weston reached out, his fingers gently intertwining with hers. "Then let's change that. Ask me anything, Clara. I have no more secrets from you." And so, as the horses rested by the creek and the stars wheeled overhead, Clara asked her questions. Weston told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his parents to typhoid when he was 17, about joining the Union Army during the final year of the Civil War, even though he was too young. He spoke of the skills he'd learned tracking deserters, which later led to his recruitment by the Pinkerton Agency. He told her about the years spent moving from town to town, the loneliness of a life lived under assumed names and false stories. In turn, Clara shared her own past her childhood as a doctor's daughter in San Francisco, her mother's death when Clara was 16, her determination to become a teacher, despite her father's wish that she marry the son of his business partner. She spoke of her arrival in Elko, full of idealism that had slowly eroded in the face of the town's rigid expectations and judgments. As they talked, the connection between them deepened, transforming from attraction and intrigue into something more substantial, a recognition of kindred spirits, despite their different paths. "We should move on," Weston said finally, noticing the lightening of the eastern sky. "I don't think they'll follow us this far, but I'd rather reach Jack's ranch before full daylight." They mounted again, riding at a steadier pace now that they were well away from town. The landscape began to wake around them, desert birds calling, small creatures rustling in the brush, the sky transforming from black to deep blue to the pale lavender of approaching dawn. As the first golden rays of sunlight touched the distant mountains, they crested a low hill and saw the ranch spread out below them, a modest homestead with a main house, barn, and several corrals, nestled in a small valley where a tributary of the Humboldt River provided precious water. "That's it," Weston said. "Jack's place. He calls it Juniper Creek Ranch." "It's beautiful," Clara murmured, taking in the peaceful scene. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house, indicating that someone was already awake. They rode down into the valley, following a well-worn track that led to the ranch yard. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache emerged from the barn as they approached, a shotgun held casually in the crook of his arm. When he recognized Weston, his weathered face broke into a wide smile. "Well, I'll be damned. Weston Hayes, as I live and breathe." He propped his shotgun against the barn wall and strode forward to greet them. "Didn't expect to see you riding in at dawn with a lady friend." Weston dismounted and clasped the man's hand warmly. "Jack, good to see you. We've had some trouble in Elko. This is Miss Clara O'Sullivan. Clara, this is Jack McCall, an old friend from my Army days." Jack tipped his hat respectfully to Clara. "Miss O'Sullivan, any friend of Weston's is welcome here." His sharp eyes took in her travel-worn appearance and the small bag tied to her saddle. "Though I suspect there's quite a story behind this visit." "There is," Weston confirmed, "and I'd be grateful if we could impose on your hospitality while we sort things out." "Not an imposition at all," Jack insisted, helping Clara down from her horse. "My wife will be pleased to have another woman to talk to. Life gets lonely out here for her sometimes." As if summoned by his words, a petite woman with auburn hair appeared in the doorway of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Jack, "Who's visiting at this hour?" "Maggie, come meet Weston Hayes, remember, I told you about him from my regiment." "And this is Miss Clara O'Sullivan," Jack called to her. Margaret, Maggie McCall hurried across the yard, her friendly face alight with curiosity and welcome. "My goodness, you must be exhausted. Come inside, both of you. I've got breakfast nearly ready and you look like you could use a hot meal." Clara felt almost overwhelmed by the McCalls' easy hospitality after the hostility she'd faced in Elko. As Maggie ushered her into the comfortable farmhouse kitchen, with its mouth-watering smells of coffee and biscuits, she felt the tension begin to ease from her shoulders. While Jack and Weston saw to the horses, Maggie showed Clara to a small but clean guest room. "You can freshen up in here, dear. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll bring you a towel. Then you come have some breakfast and tell me what brings you to our little corner of Nevada." Left alone briefly, Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past 12 hours finally catching up with her. She was a fugitive now, in a sense running from not just the town's judgment but potentially the law as well, if Sheriff Morgan decided to pursue them. Her teaching career was in ruins, her reputation beyond repair. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small spark of exhilaration burned. For the first time in her adult life, she had acted purely on her own convictions, following her heart rather than the expectations of others. Whatever happened next, she would face it on her own terms and with Weston by her side. Over a hearty breakfast of biscuits, eggs, and bacon, Weston explained their situation to the McCalls, including his true identity as a Pinkerton agent and the manhunt that had brought him to Elko. "James Carver," Jack nodded thoughtfully. "The name sounds familiar. Might have passed through here about 3 weeks back looking for ranch work. Big fellow, scar across his chin." Weston straightened, suddenly alert. "That's him. Did you hire him?" Jack shook his head. "Didn't care for the look of him. Sent him on his way. Last I heard, he found work at the Thompson place, about 30 miles east of here." "The Rocking T Ranch," Maggie confirmed. "Sarah Thompson mentioned at church that they'd taken on a new hand recently. Keeps to himself, she said." Clara watched the transformation in Weston's demeanor, the casual breakfast companion replaced by the focused detective. His eyes had taken on a sharpness, his posture more alert. "Jack, do you mind if I borrow fresh horses later today? I need to ride out to the Thompson place." "Course not," Jack agreed. "But maybe you should rest first. You've been riding all night." Weston hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and his exhaustion. "He's right," Clara said softly, touching Weston's arm. "A few hours' rest won't make a difference and you'll think more clearly." After a moment's consideration, Weston nodded. "You're right. Carver's not going anywhere if he thinks he's safe." He turned to Jack. "We'd be grateful for a place to rest, and then I'll need to make plans." "What about Miss O'Sullivan?" Maggie asked, her kind eyes moving to Clara. "Will she be riding with you to the Thompson place?" "No," Weston said firmly before Clara could respond. "It's too dangerous. Carver is wanted for murder, and he won't hesitate to kill again if cornered." Clara wanted to protest, but knew he was right. She would only be a liability in such a confrontation. "I can stay here if the McCalls don't mind," she said. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Maggie said warmly. "It's a blessing having another woman around. Our daughter's away at school in San Francisco, and I miss female company something fierce." After breakfast, exhaustion overtook them both. Clara retired to the guest room, falling into a deep sleep despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the worry that clouded her mind. She woke in the late afternoon to find the house quiet. Smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could, she made her way to the kitchen, where Maggie was preparing dinner. "There you are, dear," the older woman greeted her. "I was beginning to think you might sleep right through till morning." Can't say I'd blame you after what you've been through." "Where's Weston?" Clara asked, noticing his absence. A shadow crossed Maggie's face. "He and Jack rode out to the Thompson place about an hour ago." Weston couldn't wait any longer once he heard that Carver had threatened one of the Thompson children yesterday. He was worried the man might hurt someone else or run if he suspected he was being pursued. Fear clutched at Clara's heart. He went after Carver, without waiting for the authorities. Jack tried to convince him to telegraph the sheriff in Wells, but Weston was concerned about word getting back to Carver if they did. They took Jack's rifle and plenty of ammunition. Maggie squeezed Clara's hand reassuringly. "Jack's a fine shot, and from what I hear, Weston knows how to handle himself in a fight." Clara nodded, trying to suppress her rising anxiety. "How far is the Thompson ranch?" "About 4 hours' ride. They won't be back until well after dark, I expect." Maggie guided Clara to a chair at the kitchen table. "Now, while we wait, why don't you tell me a bit more about yourself, and about you and Weston? Jack says there's something special between you two." Despite her worry, Clara found herself warming to Maggie's genuine interest. As they prepared dinner together, she shared more about her life in Elko and her growing feelings for Weston. "It happened so quickly," she admitted as she kneaded dough for bread. "Sometimes I wonder if I've lost my mind, throwing away everything for a man I barely know." "Love doesn't always give us the luxury of time," Maggie said wisely. "Jack and I knew each other just 6 weeks before we married. My family was scandalized. They wanted me to marry the banker's son back in Ohio. But 20 years later, I've never regretted following my heart. The people in Elko think I've lost all sense of propriety," Clara said, the pain of their rejection still fresh. "My father will likely disown me when he hears what's happened." Maggie's expression softened with sympathy. "People fear what they don't understand, and love between two people who don't fit their notion of what's suitable that frightens them most of all. It reminds them of their own limitations." As the evening deepened into night with no sign of the men, Clara's anxiety grew. She and Maggie sat in the parlor, mending by lamplight, their conversation growing more sporadic as the hours passed. When the clock struck 10, Maggie set aside her sewing. "They should have been back by now," she said, voicing what Clara had been thinking. "Unless they decided to stay overnight at the Thompson place. Or unless something went wrong," Clara couldn't help adding. They waited another hour, the silence of the ranch house broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Just as Maggie was suggesting they try to get some sleep, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Both women rushed to the door. In the moonlight, they could make out 2 riders approaching, then 3, with the third figure slumped over his saddle. "Jack," Maggie called, rushing out into the yard. As the riders drew closer, Clara could see it was indeed Jack and Weston, with a third man bound and apparently unconscious across his horse. "We're all right," Jack called, dismounting stiffly. "Got ourselves a prisoner, though." Weston swung down from his horse, and Clara could see a dark stain on his left sleeve. "You're hurt," she gasped, hurrying to his side. "It's just a graze," he assured her, though his face was drawn with pain. "Carver's a decent shot, but we had the advantage of surprise." Together, they helped Jack secure the still unconscious Carver in the ranch's root cellar, a solid structure with a heavy door that would serve as a makeshift jail, until they could transport him to the proper authorities. Back in the house, Clara insisted on tending to Weston's wound while Maggie saw to a minor cut on Jack's forehead. The bullet had indeed just grazed Weston's upper arm, but the wound was deep enough to require cleaning and bandaging. "What happened out there?" Clara asked as she carefully washed the injury with warm water and soap. Weston winced slightly at her ministrations, but remained still. We arrived at the Thompson place just before sunset. Sarah Thompson confirmed that Carver had been acting strangely, especially after Jack showed up asking about him. He'd threatened their 10-year-old son when the boy accidentally knocked over his gear. He was planning to run, Jack added from across the room, where Maggie was applying a bandage to his head. Had his horse saddled and was packing his things when we approached the bunkhouse. He saw us coming and opened fire. Fortunately, the other ranch hands helped us corner him, Weston continued. He tried to escape out the back, but Jack cut him off. In the struggle, he hit his head on a beam. He's been out cold since then. What now? Clara asked, securing the bandage around Weston's arm. First thing tomorrow, Jack and I will take him to Wells. There's a U.S. Marshal there who can hold him until arrangements can be made to transport him to Sacramento for trial. Weston caught Clara's hand as she finished with the bandage. My job will be done then, Clara. I'll have fulfilled my contract. The implications of his words hung between them. With his assignment completed, Weston would be free to make other choices, including what role, if any, Clara would play in his future. I'll need to wire my employer from Wells, Weston continued. After that. He glanced around to make sure the McCalls were out of earshot, then lowered his voice. After that, if you're willing, I thought we might head to California. I have some savings, enough to start fresh somewhere. Clara's heart quickened. Together, Weston nodded, his eyes serious but warm. Together, if that's what you want. What about your work with the Pinkerton agency? She asked. I've been thinking about that, he replied. There are other ways to use my skills. Private investigation work in San Francisco, perhaps. Something that wouldn't require constant travel. He hesitated. It would mean a more settled life than I've known in years. A real home. A home, Clara repeated softly, the word carrying a weight of longing. I'd like that, Weston. His smile then was worth all the uncertainty they faced. Then that's what we'll work toward. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Clara stood on the porch of the McCalls' ranch house, watching as Weston and Jack prepared to transport their prisoner to Wells. Carver had regained consciousness during the night, a surly, threatening presence even when secured with rope and under guard. Clara had glimpsed him only briefly as the men transferred him from the root cellar to a wagon, where he now sat with his hands and feet bound, a dark scowl on his face. I should be back by tomorrow evening, Weston told her, stepping close enough that his words were for her alone. The marshal in Wells is a good man. He'll make sure Carver faces justice in California. Clara nodded, trying to mask her concern. Be careful. Even bound, he's dangerous. Jack and I will watch him every minute, Weston promised. His eyes softened as he looked at her. When I return, we'll make plans for our journey west, if that's still what you want. It is, Clara affirmed, more certain than ever. In just 2 days at the McCall ranch, she had begun to envision a different kind of life, one where she wasn't constrained by Elko's narrow expectations, where she could build something new with this man who had so unexpectedly captured her heart. Weston glanced toward the wagon, where Jack was making final preparations, then back to Clara. With a gentle hand, he tilted her chin up and kissed her, a brief but tender moment that left her breathless. That's to seal the promise, he said softly. I'll come back for you, Clara O'Sullivan. She watched them depart, the wagon rumbling down the track toward the main road, dust rising in their wake. Beside her, Maggie placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. He's a good man, the older woman said. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at you. I believe he is, Clara agreed. Though sometimes it frightens me how quickly everything has changed. Life has a way of doing that, Maggie replied with a knowing smile. Come help me with the gardening. It'll keep your mind occupied while we wait. The next day and a half passed slowly for Clara, filled with the rhythms of ranch life. She helped Maggie with household tasks, grateful for the physical work that left her too tired to worry excessively. In the evenings, the two women sat by the fire, Maggie sharing stories of her early days on the ranch and offering gentle wisdom about building a life with a man like Weston. "The road won't always be easy," she cautioned. "Men with restless spirits need anchoring, but they also need freedom. It's a delicate balance to strike." Clara absorbed these insights, increasingly certain that whatever challenges lay ahead, she wanted to face them with Weston. The thought of returning to her constrained life in Elko held no appeal now that she had glimpsed a different possibility. It was late afternoon on the second day when the sound of an approaching horse brought both women hurrying to the porch. Clara's heart leaped at the sight of Weston riding alone toward the ranch, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. "He's back," she breathed, relief washing through her. As he drew closer, she could see the weariness in his posture, but also a lightness that hadn't been there before. He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat as he approached the women. "It's done," he announced. "Carver is in custody in Wells. The marshal has already telegraphed Sacramento, and deputies will arrive within the week to transport him for trial." "And Jack?" Maggie asked anxiously. "He's fine," Weston assured her. "He stopped in town to pick up supplies. He'll be home by nightfall." Maggie nodded in relief, then tactfully excused herself to prepare dinner, leaving Weston and Clara alone on the porch. "I've been thinking about our next steps," Weston said once they were alone. He led Clara to the porch swing where they sat side by side, their shoulders touching. "I wired my employer from Wells. My contract is officially completed, with full payment to be sent to the bank in Sacramento." "So you're free now," Clara said. Weston nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Free to choose what comes next, and Clara, I choose you if you'll have me." Her heart swelled at the simple declaration. "I will," she whispered. "But Weston, what about your work, your life?" "I spoke with the marshal in Wells about possibilities," he replied. "He mentioned that the city of San Francisco is always in need of men with investigative experience for their police force. It would mean a steady position, a respectable job." He took her hand in his, a foundation upon which to build a life together. Clara could scarcely believe what she was hearing. "San Francisco? We'd return to my hometown." "I thought you might like that," Weston said. "You'd be close enough to reconcile with your father if that's what you want, and you could teach again. San Francisco has many schools." The thoughtfulness of his plan touched her deeply. "You've considered everything." "Not quite everything," he replied, a hint of nervousness entering his voice. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." His eyes, usually so confident, now held a question. "I know it's fast, Clara. Some might say too fast. But I've learned that when something is right, you don't question it. You hold on with both hands." Clara looked at the ring, then at the man offering it, and knew with absolute certainty what her answer would be. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Weston." His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "We could be married in Wells before we leave for California," he suggested. "If that's not too soon," Clara laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "After everything that's happened, nothing seems too soon anymore." Their kiss was deeper this time, a seal on the promises they'd made. When they finally parted, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "There's one more thing," Weston said, his expression growing serious again. "I think we should return to Elko before we leave Nevada." Clara stiffened. "Elko? Why would we go back there?" "To face them," he said simply. To show them that their judgment and condemnation didn't defeat us, that love doesn't need approval to be true. His words struck a chord in Clara's heart. The thought of returning to Elko was daunting, but there was wisdom in his suggestion. Running away in the night had been necessary, but facing the town openly would bring a different kind of closure. "All right," she agreed. "We'll go back together." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Jack and Maggie were delighted by the engagement, insisting on hosting a small celebration dinner. Maggie helped Clara alter one of her own dresses to serve as a wedding gown, while Jack offered to stand as witness when they reached Wells. On the morning of their departure, Clara embraced Maggie with genuine affection. "I can't thank you enough for everything. You've brought a spark back to this old ranch," Maggie replied, her eyes misty. "Promise you'll write from San Francisco." "I promise," Clara said. "And perhaps you and Jack could visit someday." They set out for Elko with Jack accompanying them, leaving Maggie to mind the ranch. The journey took most of the day, and it was late afternoon when they crested the final hill and saw the town spread out before them. Clara's stomach tightened with anxiety as they approached. "What if they try to arrest us?" "They have no grounds," Weston assured her. "We've broken no laws, and if Sheriff Morgan tries anything, Jack and I will handle it." They rode directly down the main street, drawing curious and then shocked stares from the townspeople who recognized them. Clara held her head high, acutely aware of the whispers that followed their progress. They dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, where Weston insisted on speaking with Morgan first. The sheriff, a barrel-chested man with a gray, streaked beard, emerged onto the boardwalk with his hand resting meaningfully on his pistol. "Hayes," he acknowledged coldly. "Didn't expect to see you back in Elko." "Sheriff Morgan," Weston replied evenly. "I've come to clear my name and Miss O'Sullivan's. I'm a Pinkerton agent, not an outlaw. I was in Elko tracking James Carver, wanted for murder in Sacramento. He's now in custody in Wells." Morgan's eyes narrowed skeptically. "You expect me to believe that story?" Weston handed over a folded document. "This letter from U.S. Marshal Thomas Wilson in Wells should confirm everything. You're welcome to telegraph him for verification." The sheriff read the letter slowly, his expression shifting from disbelief to grudging acceptance. "Seems I misjudged you, Hayes," he admitted finally, "though that doesn't excuse you two running off in the middle of the night." "We left because a mob was coming for us," Clara spoke up, finding her voice. "Because this town decided to condemn us without cause." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Clara recognized faces from the school board, church members, neighbors who had shunned her. Among them was her former landlady, Mrs. Whittaker, her pinched face full of disapproval. Miss O'Sullivan abandoned her position and her reputation, the older woman called out. "Running off with a strange man in the dead of night. The scandal of it can't be erased by fancy letters." Weston stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed street. "Miss O'Sullivan showed kindness to a stranger when the rest of you showed only suspicion. She saw worth in me when you saw only threat. And for that, you drove her from her home and her livelihood." He turned to address the entire crowd. "We're leaving Elko today. We're to be married in Wells, and then we're heading to San Francisco to build a new life. But before we go, I wanted you all to hear this. Love does not need approval to be true. It stands on its own, regardless of what others think of it." His words hung in the air, meeting with silence from some and murmurs of discontent from others. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a man stepped forward. Dr. Patrick O'Sullivan, Clara's father, whom she hadn't seen since their argument days before. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "is this true? Are you to be married?" Clara moved to stand beside Weston, drawing strength from his presence. "Yes, father. I love him, and I'm going to be his wife." The doctor looked between them, conflict evident in his aging face. He had come to Elko only a month after Clara, setting up a practice that had quickly become essential to the town. His disapproval of her friendship with Weston had been one of the catalysts for the town's reaction. "I received your letter," he said finally. "About this man's true identity and purpose here. I didn't want to believe it." "It's the truth," Clara affirmed. "Everything I wrote was true. Weston is a good man, Father. I wish you could see that." Dr. O'Sullivan studied Weston with a physician's evaluating gaze. "You intend to provide for my daughter, to give her the life she deserves." "I do, sir," Weston replied without hesitation. "I love her, and I'll spend my life making her happy." Something in the doctor's stern expression softened slightly. "I may have been hasty in my judgment," he conceded. "Clara has always had a good heart and a sound mind. If she sees worth in you, perhaps there is more to you than I recognized." It wasn't a blessing exactly, but it was an acknowledgement that meant more to Clara than she could express. "Will you write to me in San Francisco, Father? I'd like you to be part of our lives." The doctor nodded slowly. "I will, and perhaps when you're settled I might visit." The tension in the crowd began to dissipate, some drifting away, others watching with curiosity rather than hostility. Clara noticed Miss Jenkins, the school board secretary, approach hesitantly. "Miss O'Sullivan," the woman said quietly, "I want you to know that not all of us agreed with your dismissal. Some of us argued that your personal life was your own business, so long as you taught the children well, which you always did." Clara was touched by this unexpected support. "Thank you, Miss Jenkins. That means a great deal to me." After a few more exchanges with townsfolk, some cordial, others merely civil, they collected Clara's remaining belongings from storage at her father's house and prepared to depart. As they mounted their horses, Clara glanced back at the town that had been her home for 4 years. "Are you sad to leave?" Weston asked, reading her expression. She considered the question carefully. "Not sad exactly, but it's strange to close this chapter of my life so abruptly." "Not every ending is sad," he reminded her, "especially when it leads to a new beginning." With that, they rode out of Elko, Jack McCall beside them, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. They would reach Wells by the following day, be married in the small church there, and then begin their journey to California and the new life that awaited them. 3 days later, Clara stood beside Weston in the modest church in Wells, Nevada, speaking vows that bound their lives together. She wore Maggie's altered dress, with wildflowers in her hair and her mother's cameo at her throat. Weston, freshly shaved and wearing a new shirt purchased in Wells, looked at her with such devotion that it brought tears to her eyes. Jack and Maggie McCall stood as witnesses, while the local minister, a kind-faced man who had known Jack for years, performed the ceremony. It was simple but meaningful, a perfect reflection of the honest love they shared. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Mr. Hayes, you may kiss your bride." Weston's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, the first of many they would share as husband and wife. As they turned to face their small audience, Clara felt a profound sense of rightness. The path that had brought them here had been unexpected and at times frightening, but she wouldn't have changed a moment of it. The journey to San Francisco took nearly 2 weeks, traveling by stagecoach and then by steam train once they reached the Central Pacific Line. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Wells, and subsequent nights in a series of increasingly comfortable accommodations as they moved west. In those private hours, they discovered each other fully, their physical intimacy deepening the bond between them. Clara, raised with the proper restraint expected of a lady, found herself blossoming under Weston's patient, tender attentions. For his part, Weston confessed that, while he wasn't without experience, he had never before known the particular joy of loving someone with both body and soul. "You've changed everything for me, Clara Hayes," he murmured one night as they lay tangled together in the privacy of their compartment on the train to Sacramento. "I never thought I'd have this a wife, a future that wasn't just the next assignment." "And you've given me courage I didn't know I possessed," she replied, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Courage to follow my heart instead of others' expectations." When they finally arrived in San Francisco in early September 1876, the city was awash in fog and the hustle of commerce. Clara felt a surge of nostalgia as they disembarked at the busy station. This city had been her childhood home, though much had changed in the years she'd been away. They took rooms at a respectable hotel, while Weston pursued his contact with the San Francisco Police Department. Within a week, he had secured a position as a special investigator. His Pinkerton experience and the glowing recommendation from Marshal Wilson opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Clara, meanwhile, visited her old neighborhood and reconnected with childhood friends. Through these contacts, she learned of a position at a girls' preparatory school in the growing western part of the city. The headmistress, impressed by Clara's credentials and untroubled by the circumstances of her departure from Elko, offered her a teaching position for the fall term. By October, they had rented a modest but comfortable home in a respectable neighborhood not far from Golden Gate Park. It was a far cry from Clara's boarding house room in Elko or Weston's itinerant lifestyle, with its small garden, bay windows, and proximity to both their workplaces. "Our first real home," Clara said as they moved in their newly purchased furniture, simple pieces that they had selected together. "The first of many good things we'll build together," Weston replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood in what would be their parlor. Life settled into a rhythm that was both new and deeply satisfying. Weston's work with the police department was challenging but rewarding, allowing him to use his skills while maintaining the stability of a permanent position. He still faced danger at times, but he always returned home to Clara, honoring his promise to build their life together. Clara thrived as a teacher at the girls' school, her natural aptitude for education finding fuller expression in the progressive atmosphere of San Francisco than it had in Elko's more traditional setting. Her students responded to her warmth and intelligence, and she found herself promoted to head of the English department by the end of her first year. True to his word, Dr. O'Sullivan wrote regularly from Elko. His initial reserve gradually thawed as he came to accept Weston as Clara's husband. In the summer of 1877, he visited them in San Francisco, staying for 2 weeks that helped heal the rift between father and daughter. "He's a better man than I first judged," the doctor admitted to Clara on the eve of his departure. "I can see how happy he makes you, which is all a father truly wants for his daughter." They also maintained correspondence with the McCalls, whose kindness during that pivotal time in their lives had forged a lasting friendship. Jack and Maggie visited San Francisco in 1878, marveling at the bustling city and the comfortable life Weston and Clara had created. In the spring of 1879, their family grew with the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas Jack Hayes, honoring both Clara's father, whose middle name was Thomas, and their friend Jack McCall. The joy of parenthood added new dimensions to their love, watching Weston cradle their infant son with such gentle wonder that it made Clara's heart overflow. "I never imagined I could love someone so completely," Weston confessed as they stood over Thomas's cradle one evening. "Except you, of course," he added with a smile, pressing a kiss to Clara's temple. 2 years later, their daughter Margaret Clara joined the family, a spirited girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's questioning mind. The Hayes household became a place of learning, laughter, and love, everything Clara had dreamed of, but had never quite believed would be hers. Weston's career continued to advance, his reputation for integrity and thoroughness earning him respect throughout the city. By 1885, he had been promoted to chief investigator, a position that allowed him to mentor younger officers while still participating in the more complex cases that engaged his intellect. Clara balanced motherhood with her teaching career until 1886, when she and a colleague founded a small academy for girls that emphasized both traditional subjects and practical skills that would serve them in an evolving world. The school quickly gained a reputation for excellence, attracting students from prominent San Francisco families as well as scholarship students, whose promise Clara recognized and nurtured. Through it all, their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They weathered the challenges that inevitably arose Weston's occasional dangerous assignments, the illness that nearly took young Thomas in the winter of 1883, the fire that damaged their first academy building in 1888 with the strength that came from facing difficulties together. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1891, they returned to Nevada, taking their children to meet the McCalls and to show them the places where their parents' story had begun. Standing on the main street of Elko, now a larger and more prosperous town than it had been when they left, Clara felt no lingering bitterness, only a sense of how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" she asked Weston as they watched Thomas and Margaret exploring the general store with Jack McCall. "Giving up the freedom of your Pinkerton days?" Weston shook his head, his arm secure around her waist. "Not for a moment. Everything I've gained you, our children, our home is worth infinitely more than what I left behind." As they rode back to the McCall ranch that evening, the setting sun painting the Nevada landscape in shades of gold and purple, Clara reflected on the words Weston had spoken in this very town 15 years earlier. Love does not need approval to be true. How right he had been. Their love had stood on its own merit, weathering disapproval and distance, growing stronger with each passing year. What had begun in controversy had blossomed into a life of purpose, joy, and deep contentment. That night, after the children were asleep in the McCall's guest room, Clara and Weston stood on the porch under a canopy of stars, reminiscent of that first night they had spent fleeing Elko. "I've been thinking," Weston said, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. "Perhaps it's time for a change." Clara turned to him, curious. "What kind of change?" "The police commissioner has offered me a position training new investigators," he explained. "It would mean less fieldwork, more regular hours." "Is that what you want?" she asked, knowing how much he still enjoyed the investigative aspects of his work. Weston smiled, drawing her closer. "What I want is more time with you and the children. Thomas will be off to university before we know it, and Margaret's growing up so fast." His expression grew more serious. "I've missed too many dinners, too many bedtime stories. I don't want to miss any more than I have to." Clara touched his face gently. "You're a wonderful father, Weston. The children adore you." "And I adore them and their mother," he replied. "So what do you think?" "Should I accept the commissioner's offer?" "I think," Clara said slowly, "that whatever decision brings you happiness will bring me happiness too. That's how it's always been between us." Weston kissed her then, a kiss filled with 15 years of shared history and the promise of many more to come. "Do you know what today is?" he asked when they parted. Clara nodded. "Besides our anniversary, it's the day we rode into Juniper Creek Ranch running from Elko. The day everything changed." Weston confirmed. "The day I realized I couldn't imagine a future without you in it." As they stood together under the vast Nevada sky, Clara felt the same certainty she had experienced on that long-ago night, that despite the obstacles they had faced and would likely face again, the love between them was unshakable, a true north by which they would always navigate. "I love you, Weston Hayes," she whispered, "today and always." "And I love you, Clara Hayes," he replied, his voice carrying the depth of emotion that 15 years had only strengthened. "Today and always." In that moment, on the very ground where they had first found refuge together, they renewed the promise they had made to each other to face whatever came their way as one, to build a life worthy of the love they shared, and to never forget that love, true love, needs no approval but their own.